Well, good morning. It is time once again for Ask the Pastor, and today we're going to answer a few questions from Nancy Elliott, and they're pretty practical questions, and they're ones that have been asked of me before, and so I figured I'd take the time to let everybody know about them, and then we're going to answer a question from Richard Kimmel, which just came through yesterday. I think it's a really good question to answer in this one video. So Nancy asked me the question of why don't I wear a robe or stand at the pulpit? And honestly, that's just kind of a personal choice. I don't feel comfortable in a robe. They're hot, they're sweaty, they don't have pockets. I can't put my hands in my pockets. The um, microphone, is hard to deal with in a robe. I mean, those are practical issues. But, in my mind, I like to be of the people. And so I like to look like the people that are attending the church. And so I choose not to wear a robe. I have worn it a couple times through here, and will wear it upon request at funerals, weddings, those sorts of things. The other thing, going along with that is the idea of stoles is, I don't wear a stole as well. So a stole just kind of lays over you like this, that you wear during churches, and you've seen people wear these as well. A stole is a sign of ordination, which shows that you are yoked into the church. That's the symbolism behind it. So when you're ordained in the United Methodist Church as an elder or deacon, you have the privilege of wearing a stole. And so it just kind of goes the same way for me that I don't wear them very often or, much at all, just for the same reason. For comfort, I like to be with the people and feel more a part of the people. And that's something maybe we can change. Maybe I can just wear a stole over my shirt and tie for communion and those types of things and do that. We could do that. That would work out well. I appreciate that. Why don't I stand behind a pulpit? So most of you know I don't write my sermons out. If you've seen my sermon notes, you'll see it's a bunch of scribbles that I even have a hard time writing, and a few words here and there that point me in the direction I'm going. And so I don't stand behind a pulpit for one. One, I don't need to because I don't have a written manuscript. And two, it just becomes a comfort level for me. I don't feel comfortable being restrained by the pulpit. I like to get out there and talk and to be out there for the people. I think it kind of adds a little bit to the pulpit, or at least to the message. The other question is, I've been to over 60 Christmas Eve services and there was never communion. Was this a personal choice or is it a new Methodist practice? So I've been here for 8 years, and this church has always done communion. The previous 4 years at Britain Grace has done communion. 3 years in Rensselaer, we've done communion. In London, Azalea, we've always done communion. So in my 18 years, 19 years, getting old, I've always done communion. It's always been the practice of the churches I've served. I think it's important that we share communion on Christmas Eve for the visitors who come twice a year, to share our faith and to share who we are in a greater body of Christ. So I am sorry, Nancy, if you have not been a part of a communion service, but at Mickelson, that will be the case as long as I'm here and hopefully to follow. I think that's a tradition of this church. Language translation. So I'm not 100% positive what you mean by that, so I'm wondering if it's more about different Bible translations. So we know that we have the NRSV, which is our Pew Bible, and we have the English Standard Version and the Message Bible and the New Living Translation and those sorts of translations. And so the biggest difference is whether it's a paraphrase or whether it's an actual Bible translation. And so here's the difference. A paraphrase uses words to create meaning, so kind of like a word picture. And I'll give you an example. In the Message, when Paul is talking about communion in 1 Corinthians, in the NRSV, it says something that along the lines that people are coming to the communion table and they're getting full. So they're eating a meal at the communion table, which is obviously not a good practice. In the Message translation, it says, if you're hungry, get a sandwich. And so, it just paints that word picture to give it more meaning. And not to say that there's anything wrong with that. I like the Message translation better than I like the Living Bible for their paraphrases. But the NRSV, the ESV, the NIV, all those are just they're just minor differences in translation of the Greek and Hebrew. If you use any of those, I wouldn't worry much about it. Personally, I'm not a fan of the King James. It hasn't changed in 150 years. Their translation, the whole Old English thing is difficult to deal with, but the fact that they haven't used modern research techniques and updated some of the meaning behind the words just kind of gives me pause about using the King James translation. That and the fact, that there's a lot of churches that are King James only, and that's the authorized version of the Bible. Well, it was authorized by, King James, so it's political, but it's not the Bible translation. There are better translations out there than the Bible. The last one from her is, how do we get to Jesus from Emmanuel? And so for that, we need to go to Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. And it says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. It says, look for a young woman who is with child and shall bear a son and shall name him Immanuel. And so that's the verse that we take this Emmanuel, Jesus thing from us. So we know Emmanuel means God with us. And so this phrase kind of morphs into the sign that God is with us. So it's a young woman who's going to give us a child. So it's Jesus who was born of Mary. So that's how we kind of get from Emmanuel to Jesus, because Jesus is the embodiment of God being with us, which is what Emmanuel means. So, it's not a great answer, but it's the answer that we go with. The one question from Richard Kimmel is, what's the difference between the United Methodist Church and the Free Methodist Church? And so, you got to go back in history. So you got to go back to like the 1860s, or maybe it was just a few years before 1860 when the Free Methodist Church kind of broke off from the Methodist Church. And, the old wives' tale story that, the Methodist would have been Methodist Episcopal Church at the time, was charging for pews, and people didn't think that was right. They should have been free, so they became the Free Methodist Church. But that's just a story that's out there. It's really not a good story. It's kind of a trivial story, old wives' tale, if you will. Free Methodist Church was actually started because of slavery. The original founders of the Free Methodist Church wanted those who had slaves removed from the membership rolls. Pretty much it. There were some social justice issues in that, and they're still big on social justice issues today. But its roots are in slavery, and to have all people free from slavery, and to have those who own slaveries removed from the rolls. And I know that sounds like, hey, that's a no-brainer. We should just do that anyway. But, you got to look at the context of the 1860s where slavery happened, just as, Civil War times. It caused a split within our denomination to the Methodist Episcopal North and the Methodist Episcopal South over the issue of slavery. So, stuff happens. Denominations split. That's just a part of who we are. One of the other things is that in the founding, they believed that the Methodist Episcopal Church wasn't living up to their Methodist roots, and you can make that argument today. As we're looking as a split. Free Methodist churches, in reality nowadays, you're not going to be able to notice the difference, other than they tend to be a little more conservative than a lot of United Methodist churches are. You could walk into a Free Methodist church, you could walk into a United Methodist church, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. They still have an appointed pastor. They have a book of discipline. We have a book of discipline. So, there's minor differences in polity as far as appointments and those types of things. We have an appointed system where pastors get moved every once in a while. You would have a new pastor appointed to you, and the person would be introduced to you as your new pastor. And the Free Methodist Church is kind of a hybrid, where they maybe have choices as to the pastor that they would like to see. So it's not as I don't want to say stringent because I kind of like the appointed system, but it's a little more based on what the church needs more. I know that sounds horrible, but it's just not the same system of appointment for pastors. Let's just put it that way. Free Methodist Church, they're, as far as the denomination, they are smaller than the United Methodist Church. But the Free Methodist Church, through the good work of the pastors that have been there for many years, Free Methodist Church is the largest church in Grayling, and God bless them, they do good work. Free Methodist Church is very focused on international missions, and good for them. God bless them. They do good work with that. It's not to say that the United Methodist Church isn't, but they tend to focus on that more. Overall, Free Methodist, United Methodist, I wouldn't put much difference between us other than, they tend to be a little more conservative than a lot of Methodist churches. I have good friends that are Free Methodist. I went to a Free Methodist university. I graduated from Spring Arbor University. Thought I got a great education there, and things were well. But that's, about it. I mean, there's not a huge difference. And like I say, if you walked into our church and walked into their church, you probably wouldn't notice much of a difference. They have a band, we have a band. They do a sermon, we do a sermon. They're full of people, we're full of people. It's all good. We're all on the same team. We're fighting the same battles. We just, have some minor differences in polity and maybe some theological differences as well. So with that, I'm going to let you go. I went a little longer than I normally do. But thank you, Nancy and Richard, for your question. I hope that answers them. If you have other questions you want to submit, the email address is at the bottom here. Go ahead and email them to me, and I will get to them as soon as I can. Thanks, everybody. Have a blessed day.